Have you ever noticed how much of your life can be spent waiting for yourself? You may be waiting for the day when you finally feel confident enough to speak honestly, waiting until you are healed enough to love again, waiting until you are certain enough to make a decision, waiting until you have forgiven the past, overcome your fears, quieted your mind, or somehow become the person you imagined you were supposed to be. And perhaps beneath all of this waiting there is a quiet belief you rarely say aloud, I am not quite ready to be myself yet. There is something deeply human about this. We look toward the future and imagine another version of ourselves standing there. That person is calmer, wiser, less afraid. They no longer care so much about what others think. They know their purpose. They have made peace with what happened to them. They trust life. And we tell ourselves that when we finally become that person, then we will begin living differently. But what if the person you keep waiting for is not somewhere in the future? What if that person has been quietly present beneath everything you have learned to fear? Perhaps your deepest journey is not about becoming someone new at all. Perhaps it is about releasing everything that has convinced you that who you truly are is not already enough. Think about how often peace is postponed. You wake in the morning and almost immediately the mind begins negotiating with life. I will feel better when this problem is solved. I will relax when I know what happens. I will feel worthy when someone recognizes my value. I will forgive when they understand what they did. I will trust myself when I stop making mistakes. Without realizing it, you place your inner peace in the hands of circumstances. And circumstances are always changing. People change. Relationships change. Bodies age. Plans unfold differently than expected. Doors open and close. Some people understand you, and others never will. There are seasons when life seems to cooperate beautifully with your plans, and there are seasons when nothing seems to make sense. If your peace depends upon life arranging itself according to your expectations, peace will always remain fragile. But there may be another way to live. Imagine standing beside a river. You would never demand that the river stop moving before you allowed yourself to enjoy its beauty. You would not insist that every leaf floating downstream travel exactly where you wanted it to go. The movement is part of the river. Life is much the same. And yet the mind often says, once everything flows the way I want, then I will be peaceful. This is where so much unnecessary suffering begins. Not necessarily in what life is doing, but in the argument we are having with what life is doing. You may know this feeling in relationships. Someone becomes distant, and suddenly your mind begins creating explanations. Perhaps I am not important enough. Perhaps I said something wrong. Perhaps I need to become easier to love. So you adjust yourself. You become quieter when you want to speak. You say yes when something inside you is saying no. You try to anticipate what another person needs so they will not leave, criticize you, or become disappointed. Slowly, you can begin abandoning yourself while trying to prevent someone else from abandoning you. And then one day you feel exhausted without understanding why. The exhaustion may not come only from the relationship. It may come from the distance you have created between the person you are and the person you believe you must become in order to deserve love. There is great freedom in noticing this without judging yourself. Awareness does not accuse. Awareness simply illuminates. When sunlight enters a dark room, it does not fight the darkness. It simply reveals what was already there. You can begin to bring that same gentle light to yourself. You might notice the moment you are trying to earn approval. You might notice the fear beneath your need to control an outcome. You might notice how quickly you compare your life with someone else's life and conclude that you are behind. And rather than saying, I shouldn't feel this way, perhaps you can simply become curious. Who is the I that believes it is behind? Behind whom? Behind what? A tree does not look across the forest and become ashamed because another tree has grown taller. A flower does not apologize because it opened later in the season. Nature seems to understand something the human ego often forgets. Life does not need comparison in order to unfold. Perhaps you do not either. There is a part of you that has learned to measure your worth. It measures your appearance, your relationships, your accomplishments, your age, your mistakes, even your spiritual progress. It asks whether you are doing enough, healing quickly enough, becoming peaceful enough. This measuring voice can be so familiar that you mistake it for yourself. But what if it is only a voice you have learned? And what if beneath that voice there is something quieter? There is an awareness in you that can notice fear without becoming fear. It can notice sadness without declaring that sadness is your identity. It can notice the past without living there. You have touched this awareness before. Perhaps you felt it while watching the ocean and suddenly your problems became quiet for a moment. Perhaps you felt it while holding the hand of someone you loved. Perhaps it appeared in the silence just before sleep, when there was nothing left to prove. For one brief moment, you were simply present. You were not trying to become yourself. You were yourself. This may be one of the great invitations of the spiritual life, to remember that the peaceful self is not something you manufacture. It is something you uncover. Imagine a clear sky hidden behind heavy clouds. When the clouds appear, we sometimes speak as though the sky has disappeared, but the sky has gone nowhere. The clouds are simply passing through it. Fear can be like that. Resentment can be like that. Judgment, regret, anxiety, and uncertainty can be like that. They may fill your awareness so completely that you begin believing they are who you are, yet beneath them there may still be a vastness that has not been damaged by any of these passing experiences. This does not mean denying pain. If you have been hurt, the hurt deserves tenderness. If you have lost someone, grief deserves space. If you are uncertain about your future, you do not need to pretend that uncertainty feels comfortable. Spiritual awareness is not the art of pretending everything is fine. It is the gentle recognition that even while something hurts, there is something within you capable of holding that hurt with love. And perhaps that is the person you have been waiting for. Not the fearless person, not the perfect person, not the person who has finally solved every problem. The person who can sit beside their own fear without abandoning themselves. The person who can look at an old wound and say, I no longer need this wound to tell me who I am. The person who can allow another human being to misunderstand them without immediately losing their sense of worth. The person who can stand inside uncertainty and still remain connected to something deeper than the need for certainty. You may have spent years asking life to send you this person. Perhaps now there is another question worth asking. What if life has been waiting for you to recognize that this presence has always been within you? The shift may begin very quietly. It may begin the next time you catch yourself thinking, when this changes, then I will be okay. Instead of fighting the thought, you might gently ask, what am I asking this future moment to give me that I am unwilling to give myself now? Maybe the answer is permission. Permission to rest. Permission to forgive. Permission to stop proving. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to release someone. Permission to begin again. And beneath all of those permissions may be the deepest one of all. Permission to be at peace before the world gives you a reason. There is a beautiful difference between improving your life and believing you must improve yourself before you are worthy of living it. You can learn, you can grow, you can change habits, you can make new choices. You can become more conscious of how you speak, love, forgive, and respond. But none of this requires you to begin from self-rejection. A seed does not become a tree because it despises being a seed. It grows because growth is already written into its nature. Perhaps your spiritual growth can come from the same place, not from the belief that you are incomplete, but from the recognition that something whole within you is asking to be expressed. And when you begin seeing yourself this way, the question changes. Instead of asking, how do I become the person I am waiting for, you begin asking, what am I still holding on to that keeps me from recognizing that person? Maybe it is an old resentment. Maybe it is the need to be approved of. Maybe it is the belief that your past has permanently defined you. Maybe it is comparison. Maybe it is your insistence that life must unfold according to a particular plan before you can trust it. These things do not make you less spiritual. They simply show you where awareness is being invited. And as you begin looking more closely, you may discover something surprising. Much of what has kept you waiting was never your true nature at all. It was fear speaking. It was conditioning speaking. It was the ego trying to protect an identity it had spent years building. And once you begin recognizing that voice without automatically obeying it, an entirely different relationship with yourself becomes possible. Because the person you keep waiting for may not need to be created. They may only need to be remembered. Once you begin to consider that the person you have been waiting for may already exist beneath the layers of fear and conditioning, another question naturally appears. What are those layers made of? Why is it sometimes so difficult to feel the peace that seems to be somewhere within you? Perhaps part of the answer can be found in the ego. The ego does not need to be treated as an enemy. Fighting the ego can simply become another expression of ego. It may be more helpful to see it as the part of the mind that has learned to survive through separation, comparison, control, and identification. It wants to know who you are by comparing you with someone else. It wants certainty before it will allow you to relax. It wants the past to explain you and the future to complete you. And because its entire world is built around identity, the ego is constantly asking a question that your deeper self does not need to ask. What does this say about me? Someone does not return your message, and the event itself may be quite simple, but the mind quickly turns it into a story. Maybe they are losing interest. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I do not matter as much as I thought I did. Someone criticizes you, and instead of hearing only another person's opinion, something inside you feels threatened. You want to defend yourself, explain yourself, or prove that they are wrong. You see someone your age who appears happier, healthier, more successful, or more certain about their direction, and suddenly their life becomes evidence against your own. The ego takes what happens and makes it personal. Awareness creates a little space, and that space can change everything. You begin noticing that there is the event, and then there is the meaning you give to the event. There is what someone said, and then there is the story you created about what it means. There is uncertainty, and then there are the frightening images the mind paints around that uncertainty. This does not mean your emotions are unreal. The sadness is real. The disappointment is real. The fear can feel very real. But perhaps the story surrounding the feeling does not always need to become your truth. Imagine that you are driving somewhere unfamiliar and suddenly realize you have taken the wrong road. You might feel frustrated. You may have lost 20 minutes, but you would probably turn around and continue. Now imagine responding by saying, I took the wrong road, therefore I am a failure. I always ruin everything. Everyone else knows where they are going. I should have figured this out years ago. The wrong turn lasted 20 minutes. The story might last 20 years. This is one of the subtle ways the ego creates suffering. It takes an experience and turns it into an identity. A relationship ended, therefore I am unlovable. Someone betrayed me, therefore people cannot be trusted. I made a mistake, therefore something is wrong with me. I am uncertain, therefore I am lost. I am afraid, therefore I am weak. But you are not the conclusion your mind formed during a painful moment. You are the awareness capable of seeing that conclusion. There is tremendous freedom in that distinction. You may have spent years trying to change yourself because you believed the story was you. Now you can begin observing the story without condemning the person who learned it. Perhaps you learned very early that love had to be earned. Maybe being helpful brought approval. Maybe being quiet kept the peace. Maybe achievement brought attention. Maybe you learned to sense everyone's emotional temperature before noticing your own. So you became skilled at becoming what the room required. Years later, this can look like people-pleasing. Someone asks you for something when you are exhausted, and you hear yourself saying yes. You know you need rest, but another voice appears. What if they think I am selfish? What if they become disappointed? What if they stop needing me? So you abandon your own inner truth in order to protect an image of yourself in someone else's mind. And then resentment appears. This is worth noticing gently. Sometimes resentment is not only about what another person has asked of you. Sometimes it is the pain of repeatedly saying yes when something inside you wanted to say no. You may blame the person who keeps taking while quietly refusing to see that fear has kept you from creating a boundary. Awareness changes the pattern because awareness allows you to ask a different question. Can I love this person without abandoning myself? Love does not require self-erasure. Compassion does not require dishonesty. Kindness does not mean becoming responsible for every person's feelings. When your actions arise from fear of rejection, they may look loving from the outside while leaving you empty inside. When they arise from inner alignment, even a gentle no can contain more love than a frightened yes. This is where becoming the person you have been waiting for begins to take on a deeper meaning. Perhaps you have been waiting for someone to protect your peace, someone to recognize your limits, someone to finally say, you do not have to carry all of this. And perhaps that loving voice is beginning to arise within you. Not as aggression, not as withdrawal, not as punishment, simply as awareness. I can care about you without losing myself. This is what happens when love begins replacing fear. Fear asks, what must I do so you will not leave me? Love asks, what is true here? Fear asks, how do I control what you think about me? Love asks, can I remain peaceful even if you misunderstand me? Fear tries to secure life. Love participates in life. And this brings us to one of the ego's strongest habits, control. Control can be very convincing because it often disguises itself as responsibility. You may believe that if you think about a problem long enough, you will eventually eliminate uncertainty. So you replay conversations. You imagine future outcomes. You rehearse what you will say if something goes wrong. You create entire futures in your mind and then emotionally live through them before anything has happened. The body is sitting in a quiet room, but the mind is living through 10 possible disasters. This is overthinking at its deepest level, an attempt to use thought to guarantee safety. And perhaps you have discovered that it does not work. The more certainty you demand, the more uncertainty you notice. The more you try to control every outcome, the more frightened you become of the outcomes you cannot control. Eventually, the mind becomes like a hand holding sand. The tighter it squeezes, the more slips through its fingers. What would happen if the hand opened? Not because you no longer cared, not because you became passive, but because you recognize the difference between participating in your life and trying to dominate it. You can make thoughtful choices without demanding guarantees. You can prepare without worshiping certainty. You can love someone without owning their future. You can make a decision without knowing exactly where it will lead. You can walk without seeing the entire road. A river does not receive a map of every turn before it begins moving toward the ocean. It meets rocks, bends, narrow passages, and open spaces. It keeps flowing. Perhaps trust is something like that. Not the belief that everything will happen exactly as you prefer, but the willingness to remain connected to your deeper self when it does not. This changes the meaning of uncertainty. Instead of seeing uncertainty as evidence that something has gone wrong, you can begin seeing it as the natural openness of life. Consider how much of what has mattered most to you arrived through circumstances you could never have completely planned. A person you happened to meet, a conversation you almost did not have, a disappointment that redirected you, an ending that eventually created room for another beginning. At the time, you may have called some of these moments mistakes. Years later, you may have understood them differently. Life often reveals meaning slowly. The ego wants the entire explanation now. Your deeper self can wait. There is peace in saying, I do not know what this means yet. Those words can feel frightening because the ego associates knowing with safety. But I don't know can also become a doorway. When you stop insisting that you already know how your life should unfold, you create space for possibilities that your current imagination cannot see. And perhaps this is why letting go can feel both frightening and liberating. You are not letting go of life. You are letting go of the demand that life obey your picture of it. This becomes especially powerful when you look at comparison. Comparison is one of the ego's favorite ways to convince you that your own life is somehow insufficient. You see someone who appears to have found their purpose while you still feel uncertain. Someone has the relationship you wish you had. Someone seems peaceful while you are struggling. Someone your age appears further along, and before you know it, you have left your own path and entered an imaginary competition that no one asked you to join. The strange thing about comparison is that you rarely compare whole lives. You compare the visible part of someone else's life with the most vulnerable part of your own. You see their smile, but not their sleepless nights. You see the relationship, but not the conversations behind closed doors. You see confidence, but not the years of doubt. And even if another person genuinely is flourishing, their flourishing does not diminish what is possible for you. A garden would be very strange if every flower tried to bloom at exactly the same moment. Some emerge early, some open slowly, some need more rain, some grow in shade. Their differences are not failures of timing. They are expressions of life. What if you allowed yourself the same dignity? Maybe you are not late. Maybe your life is not behind. Maybe the idea of behind exists only because the ego has created an imaginary schedule for who you were supposed to become. By 30, I should have known. By 40, I should have achieved. By 50, I should have healed. At this age, I should not still be afraid. But who wrote these rules? Life does not seem particularly interested in them. A person can awaken to a new understanding at 20 or 80. Someone can discover love after believing love was over. Someone can forgive a wound they carried for half a century. Someone can suddenly understand, in an ordinary quiet morning, something they spent decades trying to understand. The soul does not appear to measure time the way the ego does. It asks less about whether you are ahead and more about whether you are present. Can you be here? Can you meet this moment without turning it into evidence that your life should be somewhere else? This does not mean you lose intention. You can still have dreams. You can still move toward something meaningful. You can still feel called toward change. But intention and attachment are not the same. Intention says, this is the direction my heart is calling me. Attachment says, I cannot be at peace unless I arrive there. Intention moves with life. Attachment argues with life. And when attachment becomes strong enough, even beautiful desires can become sources of suffering. You may deeply desire a relationship. There is nothing wrong with that. But when the desire becomes, I cannot feel whole until someone chooses me, you have handed your wholeness to a person you have not even met. You may want clarity about your purpose. But when the desire becomes, my life has no meaning until I know exactly what I am meant to do, you may overlook the meaning already available in how you treat the person standing in front of you. You may want healing. But if healing becomes another standard you use to judge yourself, you can turn spirituality into another form of self-rejection. I should be over this by now. I should be more peaceful. I should not feel angry anymore. I thought I had healed. Notice how easily the ego can put on spiritual clothing. It can become proud of being peaceful. It can compare levels of awareness. It can judge other people for being judgmental. It can even create an idealized spiritual version of you and then criticize you every time you fail to live up to it. This is why awareness must include tenderness. You are not trying to become perfect at observing yourself. You are simply learning to notice. When fear arises, notice fear. When jealousy arises, notice jealousy. When resentment appears, notice resentment. You do not have to invite these emotions to stay forever, but neither do you need to throw them out of the house immediately. You can sit with them long enough to ask what they are trying to protect. Perhaps jealousy says, I am afraid there will not be enough for me. Perhaps resentment says, I have been hurt and I do not want to be hurt again. Perhaps control says, I am afraid of what will happen if I cannot predict everything. Perhaps people-pleasing says, I am afraid love will disappear if I disappoint someone. When you listen this way, the ego becomes less of an enemy and more of a frightened part of consciousness asking to be met with awareness. And love can enter where judgment once lived. This is important because you cannot shame yourself into inner peace. If every time fear appears you criticize yourself for being afraid, you have simply placed another layer of suffering on top of the original fear. The first pain is, I am afraid. The second pain is, there is something wrong with me because I am afraid. Awareness can release the second. You can say, fear is here, and I can remain present. This is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from ever feeling difficult emotions, but freedom from allowing every emotion to determine who you believe yourself to be. The ocean has waves, but the ocean is more than any particular wave. Your consciousness is something like this. A wave of anger may rise. A wave of sadness may rise. A wave of uncertainty may rise. If you identify completely with the wave, you believe, this is me, this is my life, this will never end. But awareness remembers the ocean. It knows that feelings move. It knows that thoughts move. It knows that seasons move. And somewhere beneath all that movement, there is a deeper stillness. You may have felt this during loss. When something important ends, the ego often asks, who am I now? A relationship ends and suddenly the future you imagined disappears with it. A career changes and the identity attached to it begins to dissolve. Children grow older and no longer need you in the same way. The body ages and the mirror reflects a face different from the one you remember. Someone you love dies, and the world seems to have been rearranged without asking your permission. These moments can be deeply painful because life is not only changing around you, an identity is changing within you. And the ego resists. It says, I need things to remain as they were so I can remain who I was. But life has never promised permanence. Leaves fall, children grow, bodies change, relationships evolve, seasons turn. The wisdom may not be in preventing change, but in discovering what remains when everything that can change does change. There is something within you that has witnessed every age you have ever been. The child you once were had different thoughts, different fears, a different body, and a different understanding of life. The teenager changed. The adult changed. Your beliefs changed. Your relationships changed. Your dreams changed. Yet something has been quietly witnessing all of it. You might call it awareness. You might call it spirit. You might call it your deeper self or your connection with the source. The name matters less than the recognition. There is something in you deeper than the roles you play. And when you begin living from that deeper place, aging itself can become a teacher. Instead of only asking what time is taking away, you can ask what time is revealing. Perhaps you care less about impressing people. Perhaps you become more interested in peace than in being right. Perhaps you begin to see how much energy you once spent protecting an image. Perhaps you discover that some things you chased were never truly yours to begin with. Aging can slowly remove the illusion that you have forever to postpone being yourself. And that can be a gift, because how long do you want to wait before allowing yourself to live without constant self-judgment? How many more conversations do you want to replay? How many years do you want to spend proving something to someone who may never understand? How much of your precious attention should be given to people who are not even present? There comes a moment when peace becomes more valuable than winning an argument inside your own mind. And this is where resentment becomes important. Resentment keeps an invisible relationship alive with the person or event that hurt you. You may no longer speak to them. They may live thousands of miles away. They may even be gone from this world. Yet a conversation continues inside you. You should not have done that. You should have loved me differently. You should have understood. And perhaps you are right. Perhaps they should have. But the deeper question is not whether what happened was fair. The deeper question is, how long must your present moment continue paying for what happened in the past? Forgiveness will become important here, but forgiveness cannot be forced. For now, perhaps awareness is enough. Notice what you are carrying. Notice whose voice still lives in your mind. Notice which old moment you keep returning to as evidence of your worth. Notice what you are still demanding that yesterday change. You do not have to release everything in one moment. Simply seeing what you are carrying is already a form of awakening. You cannot put down a weight you do not realize you are holding. And perhaps this is the hidden gift of awareness. It does not immediately change the world around you. It changes your relationship with what is happening within you. You begin to see fear before fear becomes a decision. You notice comparison before comparison becomes self-rejection. You recognize control before control becomes exhaustion. You hear the ego's story before the story becomes your identity. And in that small space between awareness and reaction, another possibility appears. You can choose again, not necessarily a dramatic choice. Perhaps you simply breathe before answering. Perhaps you allow someone to disagree with you. Perhaps you stop explaining yourself. Perhaps you decide not to replay the conversation one more time. Perhaps you look at another person's beautiful life and quietly say, "May they be blessed," instead of using their happiness against yourself. Perhaps you notice anxiety and place your hand over your heart rather than reaching immediately for another distraction. These small moments matter because they are moments in which you stop abandoning yourself. And each time you stop abandoning yourself, the person you thought you were waiting for becomes a little easier to recognize. You begin to understand that freedom is not something the ego can achieve through greater control. Freedom arrives when control is no longer necessary for peace. You begin to understand that worth cannot be won through comparison because your deeper nature was never competing. You begin to understand that love does not require you to disappear. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to see that the ego does not need to be destroyed. It only needs to stop being mistaken for the whole of who you are. Imagine clouds moving across a vast blue sky. Some clouds are dark, some are light, some remain for hours, others disappear almost as soon as they arrive. The sky does not chase them. It does not become frightened that a storm cloud has permanently destroyed the blue. It allows movement within its vastness. Perhaps awareness can become that sky within you. Fear can pass through. A memory can pass through. Someone's opinion can pass through. Uncertainty can pass through. Even an old identity can pass through. And you remain. Not the frightened version of you. Not the successful version. Not the rejected version. Not the admired version. Not the younger version or the older version. Something quieter, something that does not need to be defended every moment. Something that can simply be. And when you begin touching that place, even briefly, you may realize why all your waiting has been so exhausting. You are asking the future to give you something that was never located in the future. You are asking circumstances to reveal something that circumstances could only temporarily cover. You are trying to become worthy of a peace that never required your perfection. Now another doorway begins to open, because seeing the ego is only part of the journey. Once you recognize what you are not, you become ready to return more deeply to what you are. And that return may ask something very different from control. It may ask forgiveness. It may ask surrender. It may ask trust. It may ask you to loosen your grip on the story of who you have been and become quiet enough to hear what has always been beneath it. Perhaps this is where the deepest transformation begins. Not when you finally defeat fear, but when you discover that love can hold fear. Not when you finally control life, but when you discover that you can trust yourself within its movement. Not when the past disappears, but when you stop asking the past to determine the meaning of your present. And not when you finally become the person you have been waiting for, but when you become still enough to recognize that this person has been waiting quietly within you all along. Once you begin to see that fear, comparison, control, and old identities are not the whole of who you are, something within you naturally begins to soften. You no longer have to spend so much energy fighting every thought or defending every version of yourself. You begin to understand that awakening is not an act of force, it is an act of remembering. And remembering often begins with forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of those words that can sound beautiful until you are asked to apply it to something that truly hurt you. It is easy to speak about forgiveness when the wound is small. It becomes very different when someone betrayed your trust, abandoned you, rejected you, humiliated you, or failed to love you in the way you desperately needed to be loved. In those moments, forgiveness can feel almost unfair. You may think, why should I forgive when they have never apologized? Or, why should I release this when what they did was wrong? These are understandable questions. But perhaps forgiveness is not primarily something you do for the person who hurt you. Perhaps forgiveness is a decision about what you are willing to continue carrying inside yourself. Imagine walking through life carrying a heavy stone because someone placed it in your hands many years ago. At first, holding it makes sense. It reminds you of what happened. It helps you remember not to trust too easily. It becomes evidence that the pain was real. Years pass. The person who gave you the stone may no longer be present, but you are still carrying it. Eventually, your hand begins to hurt. Your shoulder becomes tired, and one day you realize something important. Putting down the stone does not mean the stone was never heavy. It does not mean someone was right to give it to you. It simply means you no longer want yesterday to occupy your hands today. Forgiveness can be something like this. It does not erase the past. It releases your demand that the past become different before you allow yourself to be free. There may be someone in your life whom you are still waiting to change. Perhaps you are waiting for them to understand what they did, waiting for an apology, waiting for them to finally recognize your value. And perhaps part of you believes that when this happens, peace will arrive. But what if they never understand? What if the apology never comes? What if they continue believing their version of the story? Does your peace have to wait with them? There comes a moment when you may gently recognize that waiting for someone else to heal your wound keeps your inner freedom dependent upon their awareness. And your freedom belongs somewhere deeper than that. You can acknowledge what happened. You can create boundaries. You can decide that someone no longer belongs close to you. And you can still begin releasing the emotional grip that the experience has had on your heart. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not always the same thing. You can forgive without returning to a harmful situation. You can release resentment without pretending trust has been restored. You can wish someone peace from a distance. Sometimes love takes the form of closeness. Sometimes love takes the form of letting go. The important question is not, what would make me look spiritual? The question is, what choice allows me to remain aligned with love without abandoning the truth within me? This is where your inner journey becomes very personal. No one else can tell you exactly how long grief should take. No one can decide when your heart is ready to release something. Spiritual growth does not operate according to a schedule. A garden cannot be commanded to bloom. You can water it. You can give it light. You can remove what prevents growth. But eventually you must trust the intelligence within the seed. Perhaps healing asks for the same patience. There may be parts of your life you've been trying to force into resolution. You want to understand why something happened. You want closure. You want certainty that the pain had a purpose. But some experiences do not reveal their meaning immediately. Sometimes meaning arrives years later. Sometimes the meaning is not found in why something happened, but in who you discovered yourself to be while walking through it. You may discover that you can survive what you once believed would destroy you. You may discover that losing someone's approval allowed you to hear your own voice. You may discover that an ending created space for a life you could not previously imagine. You may discover that the period you called lost was quietly teaching you how to stop abandoning yourself. This does not mean every painful event was secretly good. It simply means that pain does not have to receive the final word. Love can transform your relationship with what happened. Awareness can transform it. Forgiveness can transform it. And sometimes surrender can transform it. Surrender is often misunderstood because the ego hears surrender and thinks defeat. But spiritual surrender is not giving up on life. It is giving up your argument with life. There is a profound difference. You may still take action. You may still make choices. You may still leave situations that no longer serve your deepest well-being. You may still speak honestly and move toward what feels meaningful. But underneath your action, there is less desperation. You stop saying life must happen this way or I cannot be okay. Instead, something within you begins saying, I will participate fully and I will allow life to reveal what I cannot yet see. That is trust, not blind optimism, not pretending disappointment will never happen. Trust is the willingness to stop demanding guarantees before you allow yourself to live. Think of how much energy is consumed by trying to know the future. You wonder whether the relationship will last, whether the decision is right, whether your family will be okay, whether you chose the correct path, whether your body will remain healthy, whether you have enough time, whether you will ever discover what you are here to do. The mind believes that if it thinks long enough, certainty will eventually appear. But life rarely offers certainty. It offers this moment, and then another, and another. The spiritual invitation may be to meet each one consciously. Imagine walking through a forest at night with a small lantern. The lantern does not illuminate the entire forest. It shows you only the next few steps. You could refuse to move until the whole path becomes visible. Or you could trust the light you have. So much of life is like this. You do not need to see the entire journey to take the next honest step. You do not need to know how everything will turn out before choosing love now. You do not need to understand the entire purpose of your life before bringing kindness into this day. The ego wants a map. The deeper self asks for presence. And when you return to presence, something remarkable happens. The future loses some of its power to frighten you because you begin realizing that you never actually lived there. You live here. You have always lived here. Every future moment you have ever reached eventually arrived as a present moment. So perhaps the question is not, how do I secure my future? Perhaps it is, who am I being in this moment? Not what are you achieving, not how impressive do you appear, not whether everyone understands you. What quality are you bringing into this moment? Fear or love? Resistance or acceptance? Judgment or compassion? You do not need to answer perfectly. Simply asking brings awareness. And awareness begins shifting your relationship with life. This is where intention becomes something deeper than wanting. Intention, in a spiritual sense, does not have to mean forcing reality to obey your desires. It can mean choosing the energy from which you wish to live. You can enter a difficult conversation with the intention of peace. You can face uncertainty with the intention of trust. You can meet someone else's anger with the intention of not allowing their inner turmoil to become yours. You can wake in the morning and quietly decide, today I want to remember love. This does not guarantee that everyone around you will behave lovingly. It changes what you bring to the encounter. Suppose someone speaks harshly to you. The old pattern may be immediate defense. Their anger activates your anger. Their judgment awakens your need to prove yourself. Within seconds, two egos are trying to protect themselves. But awareness creates another possibility. You notice the reaction rising? You feel it in the body. You pause. And perhaps you remember that another person's state does not have to determine your own. You may still respond firmly. You may still say that something is unacceptable, but you do not have to become the very energy that disturbed you. There is a quiet strength in this. The ego believes power means controlling the other person. The deeper self discovers that power can mean remaining connected to your own peace. This is not always easy. Some people know exactly where your old wounds are. A parent can say one sentence and suddenly you feel 12 years old again. A partner can withdraw and awaken an old fear of abandonment. A friend's success can touch the part of you that secretly believes you are falling behind. A stranger's criticism can disturb you for an entire day. These moments are not necessarily failures of spiritual awareness. They can become invitations. Every trigger can reveal where something within you still asks for love. Instead of saying, why am I reacting like this again? You might ask, what part of me is asking to be seen? Perhaps there is an old child within you who learned that mistakes cause love to disappear. Perhaps there is a younger version of you who never felt chosen. Perhaps there is a part of you still trying to prove its worth to someone who is no longer in the room. Can you meet that part without shame? Can you become the presence you once needed? This may be one of the deepest meanings of becoming the person you keep waiting for. You stop waiting for someone to travel backward through time and give you what you did not receive. You begin bringing love to that place yourself. You might quietly say, you do not have to prove anything here. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are still worthy when someone is disappointed. You are still whole when someone leaves. These are not magical phrases. They are reminders. And sometimes a reminder repeated with genuine presence can begin loosening a belief that has shaped decades of your life. You may realize that you have spent years searching for a particular kind of love because you hoped it would finally repair the feeling of not being enough. This is why relationships can become such powerful spiritual teachers. We often enter them asking another person, consciously or unconsciously, to confirm our worth. Tell me I am lovable. Tell me I matter. Tell me you will never leave. And when they cannot consistently satisfy these needs, fear appears. But another human being cannot permanently give you an identity that depends upon their constant reassurance. They are human too. They have fears. They have wounds. They have moments of unconsciousness. If your inner worth rises and falls with their behavior, you will always be emotionally negotiating for peace. Love becomes freer when you stop asking another person to complete you. Then you can appreciate their presence without turning them into the source of your being. You can say, in essence, I love you, but I do not ask you to carry the responsibility for making me whole. And this changes love. It becomes less about possession, less about fear, less about controlling whether someone stays, more about presence, more about gratitude, more about allowing another person to be who they are while remaining connected to who you are. Perhaps this is what alignment with the source begins to feel like. Not an abstract spiritual idea, but a return to the qualities that seem closest to your deepest nature. Peace, compassion, kindness, creativity, forgiveness, gratitude, love. When you express these qualities, there can be a sense that you are no longer swimming against the current of your own being. You may still have problems, but you are relating to them differently. Imagine a small boat on the ocean. If you believe you control the ocean, every wave becomes an insult. Every storm becomes evidence that life has betrayed you. But when you understand that you are navigating something larger than yourself, your relationship with the water changes. You learn to move with what cannot be controlled. Perhaps living in harmony with the source is something like this. You stop demanding that the ocean become still. You learn to discover stillness within yourself while the ocean moves. And then gratitude begins to appear. Not the forced gratitude that tells you to pretend every experience is wonderful. A quieter gratitude. The gratitude of realizing that you are here, that you can breathe, that you can become aware, that you can choose again, that after everything you have carried, something within you still knows how to love. Think about that. You have experienced disappointment, yet you can still care. You have been misunderstood, yet you can still listen. You have lost things, yet you can still appreciate. You have been afraid, yet some part of you continues walking. Perhaps this is evidence of something deeper than the personality you have spent so much time trying to perfect. There is a life moving through you. You did not command your heart to beat this morning. You did not instruct every cell in your body how to perform its work. You do not tell a wound exactly how to close or a seed exactly how to unfold beneath the soil. There is intelligence in life that operates beyond the conscious mind. You may call it nature. You may call it God. You may call it the source. The word matters less than your willingness to recognize that you are not separate from the same mystery that grows forests, moves oceans, and opens flowers toward the sun. What would happen if you trusted that intelligence a little more? Perhaps you would not need to push yourself through every doorway. Perhaps some doors can remain closed. Perhaps you would stop interpreting every delay as rejection. Perhaps you would allow a season of uncertainty to be a season rather than a permanent identity. A tree in winter does not believe it has failed because it has no leaves. It rests. It waits. Life continues invisibly beneath the surface. There may be seasons like this within you. You may feel that nothing is happening. You may feel disconnected from your purpose. You may look at your life and wonder why you are not where you expected to be. But perhaps roots are growing where no one can see them. Perhaps your deepest transformation is not always visible. Sometimes growth looks like no longer answering an argument. Sometimes healing looks like sleeping peacefully after remembering something that once kept you awake. Sometimes spiritual maturity looks like allowing someone to misunderstand you. Sometimes freedom looks like no longer checking whether someone who left regrets leaving. Sometimes awakening looks like sitting quietly in your own life and realizing you do not need to escape it. These moments may never receive applause, but perhaps the soul has never been interested in applause. The ego wants witnesses. The deeper self wants truth, and truth often becomes clearest in silence. There is a reason silence can feel uncomfortable at first. When the noise stops, you begin hearing what the noise was covering. You may hear loneliness. You may hear grief. You may hear questions you have avoided. But if you remain gently present, something else can eventually be heard beneath those things. Not necessarily words, more like a quiet sense of being. You are here. You exist before the story about who you should be. You exist before someone's opinion of you. You exist before your successes and failures. You exist before the role you perform for the world. And in that quiet awareness, you may discover that nothing essential is missing. This does not mean you will never desire anything again. Desire can remain. Dreams can remain. Relationships can remain. Purpose can remain. But they no longer have to carry the impossible burden of completing you. You begin bringing wholeness into your desires rather than asking your desires to create wholeness. You begin bringing love into your relationships rather than asking relationships to prove you deserve love. You begin bringing presence into your purpose rather than waiting for purpose to make your existence meaningful. This is a subtle transformation, but it changes everything from within. And perhaps this is why letting go becomes easier when you remember who you are. You are not letting go into emptiness. You are letting go into something deeper. When you release resentment, you fall back into peace. When you release the need for approval, you fall back into self-respect. When you release comparison, you fall back into your own path. When you release control, you fall back into trust. When you release the identity built around fear, you do not disappear. Something more authentic becomes visible. It is like wiping dust from a mirror. The mirror was never destroyed. It was only obscured. Perhaps your true self has never been broken either. Perhaps it has simply been covered by years of conclusions about who you must be, what you must prove, what you must fear, and what must happen before you can finally feel whole. And now, those conclusions can begin falling away. Not all at once. There is no need to rush. A lifetime of conditioning does not need to disappear by tomorrow morning. Even the desire to hurry can become another way of rejecting where you are. You can move gently. One judgment noticed. One resentment softened. One fearful thought observed rather than obeyed. One moment of silence. One honest boundary. One breath before reacting. One small act of forgiveness. One moment in which you remember that peace is available before everything is solved. This is how the return happens. Quietly. And perhaps one day you notice that you are responding differently to something that once controlled you. Someone criticizes you, and you do not spend the evening defending yourself in your imagination. Someone leaves, and although you grieve, you do not conclude that their leaving means you are unworthy. A plan changes, and instead of immediately assuming disaster, you become curious about what life may be opening. You look at someone else's path and genuinely wish them well without questioning your own. You remember the past, and the memory is still there, but it no longer has the same power over your body. These moments are easy to overlook, but they may be signs that you are returning home, not becoming someone else. Returning to the place within you that existed before you learned to be afraid of not being enough. Returning to the love that does not need to prove itself. Returning to the peace that does not depend upon agreement. Returning to the source from which your deepest qualities seem to arise. And then perhaps you begin to understand something that once seemed impossible. The person you were waiting for was never a distant, perfected version of you. It was the you who could forgive without forgetting your wisdom. The you who could surrender without giving up. The you who could love without disappearing. The you who could trust without knowing. The you who could feel fear and still remain connected to peace. The you who could stand in front of an uncertain future and say, I do not need to know everything in order to be present for this life. That person does not arrive someday. That person appears every time you choose awareness over unconscious reaction. Every time you choose love over the demand to be right. every time you release what you no longer need to carry, every time you return to stillness. And as this understanding settles more deeply within you, the spiritual journey becomes less about searching and more about living. The question is no longer only, who am I beneath all of this? A new question begins to emerge. How do I live from that place when ordinary life begins again? How do you remember peace on a difficult morning? How do you remain aware when someone triggers an old wound? How do you practice forgiveness when resentment returns? How do you trust when the future becomes uncertain again? Perhaps the answer is not found in one grand spiritual achievement. Perhaps it is found in small, quiet practices repeated in ordinary moments. Because remembering who you are is beautiful. But the deepest invitation is to carry that remembrance with you into the way you wake, speak, listen, forgive, love, and move through each day. And so the journey returns to ordinary life. Not to some distant mountaintop where nothing disturbs you, not to a future where every question has been answered, not to a version of yourself who never feels fear, sadness, disappointment, or uncertainty again. It returns to tomorrow morning. You wake up. Your mind begins moving. There are responsibilities waiting for you. Perhaps there is a difficult conversation ahead. Perhaps something remains unresolved. Perhaps you still do not know what comes next. And this is where the spiritual journey becomes real. Not in escaping ordinary life, but in meeting ordinary life from a different place within yourself. You may begin with a few moments of stillness. Before reaching for the world, simply notice that you are here. Feel your breathing. Listen to the silence beneath the sounds around you. You do not need to make anything happen. For a moment, there is nothing to prove. There is nowhere else you need to be. You might quietly ask yourself, what do I want to bring into this day? Not, what must I accomplish? Not, how can I make everyone approve of me? But what quality do I want to bring? Perhaps peace, perhaps patience, perhaps compassion, perhaps trust. This simple intention can become a gentle compass. The day may not follow your plans, but you can continue returning to the quality you chose. If someone becomes impatient with you, you can notice the impulse to become impatient in return. If an old fear appears, you can recognize it without handing it control of the day. If you catch yourself comparing your life with someone else's, you can return your attention to your own path. This is awareness in practice, not perfection. Returning, again and again. A wandering mind does not mean you have failed. An old emotional reaction does not erase your growth. Sometimes the deepest evidence of awareness is simply that you notice more quickly when you have left your peace. Then you return, like a river finding its way around a stone, like a breath returning after you realize you have been holding it. You can also practice gratitude, not as a way of denying what hurts, but as a way of remembering what pain sometimes causes you to overlook. There may still be something beautiful in this day. Warm sunlight entering a window, a familiar voice, a cup held between your hands, a tree moving in the wind, the ability to breathe deeply, the simple fact that you have another opportunity to meet yourself with kindness. Gratitude does not say, nothing is wrong. It says difficulty is not all that is here. And slowly, attention changes. You begin noticing that life has been offering small moments of grace that the busy mind was too occupied to receive. Forgiveness can become a daily practice too. Some mornings you may believe you have released something, only to feel the resentment return later. That is all right. Perhaps forgiveness is not always one decision made once. Sometimes it is a door you choose to open many times. When the memory returns, you can ask, do I want to carry this again today? You do not need to excuse anyone. You do not need to rewrite history. You simply decide whether the past deserves another day of your present attention. And perhaps sometimes the person you most need to forgive is yourself. For what you did not know, for the years you spent afraid, for the relationship you stayed in too long, for the opportunity you did not take, for trusting someone, for not trusting yourself, for becoming someone you thought you needed to be in order to survive. Look gently at that earlier version of you. They were making choices from the awareness available to them then. You know more now. And perhaps wisdom does not require punishing the person you used to be. Perhaps wisdom says, thank you for bringing me this far. I can choose differently now. Then let yesterday remain yesterday. There is enormous peace in no longer requiring your past self to possess your present understanding. And when uncertainty appears, as it inevitably will, practice trust. You do not need to tell yourself that everything will happen exactly as you want. You can simply remember, I have been uncertain before. There were roads you could not see. There were endings you did not understand. There were seasons you thought would last forever. And still, somehow, you arrived here. Life carried you through days you once did not know how you would survive. Perhaps you can allow that memory to soften your need for certainty. Take the next step you can see. Let the rest remain hidden for now. A seed beneath the earth does not know what the entire tree will look like. It simply responds to light, water, soil, and the intelligence of life moving within it. Maybe you can live a little more like that. Respond to what is here. Listen inwardly. Choose love where you can. Release what no longer belongs in your hands. And trust that you do not need to understand the entire design before participating in it. There will still be moments when you forget. You will still become irritated. You may still seek approval. You may catch yourself controlling, comparing, worrying, or replaying the past. When this happens, you do not need to turn your spiritual practice into another reason to criticize yourself. Simply notice, oh, I have left myself again, and return. Return to the breath. Return to awareness. Return to forgiveness. Return to love. Return to the quiet place that does not need the world to behave perfectly before it can exist. Perhaps this is what inner freedom actually looks like. Not permanent happiness, not emotional invulnerability. Freedom is knowing that you can return. The world may pull at your attention, but it does not own your awareness. Someone may judge you, but they do not determine your worth. Something may end, but endings do not define the whole of your life. Fear may speak, but fear does not have to make your decisions. The past may visit, but you do not have to move back into it. And slowly, your relationship with yourself changes. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you from your own inner world. You stop waiting for permission to rest. You stop waiting for everyone to understand. You stop waiting until you are completely healed before allowing yourself to love your life. You stop waiting for some future version of yourself to finally arrive and tell you that you are allowed to be at peace. Because you begin to recognize something. That future person was never separate from you. Every time you choose compassion instead of self-judgment, that person is here. Every time you release the need to win an argument, that person is here. Every time you forgive yourself for being human, that person is here. Every time you trust the next step without demanding the whole path, that person is here. Every time you sit quietly and remember that you are more than your fears, roles, possessions, history, and mistakes, that person is here. Perhaps you were never meant to chase this version of yourself. Perhaps you were meant to uncover it, like the sky behind the clouds, like still water beneath the waves, like light waiting behind a closed curtain. Nothing essential had disappeared. You simply forgot where to look. And now you know. Look within, not because the outside world does not matter, but because the quality of your relationship with the world begins with the quality of consciousness you bring to it. When you bring fear, the world can seem filled with threats. When you bring resentment, you find endless reasons to remain offended. When you bring comparison, everyone becomes a measurement. But when you begin bringing awareness, compassion, gratitude, and love, you start experiencing the same world differently. Maybe this is what it means to live in harmony with the source. You do not control the river. You learn to stop fighting its movement. You do not command every season. You learn that winter does not mean life has disappeared. You do not force every flower to open. You trust that growth has its own timing. And perhaps you begin offering yourself that same trust. There is no need to rush toward enlightenment. There is no finish line where you finally become worthy. There is this breath, this moment, this opportunity to remember. Before we leave this quiet space together, consider one question. What are you still waiting for before you allow yourself to become fully present in your own life? An apology? Someone's approval? Certainty? A different body? A different past? A sign? A perfect moment? Whatever answer appears, do not judge it. Simply notice it. And perhaps ask one more question. What if I no longer needed that condition in order to choose peace? You do not have to answer immediately. Let the question travel with you. Let it sit quietly beside you. Perhaps the answer will come not as words, but as a feeling of release. A little less resistance, a little more space, a little more willingness to trust. And when that happens, You may discover that the person you have been waiting for was never waiting somewhere ahead of you. That person was beneath the fear, beneath the resentment, beneath the need to be chosen, beneath the need to prove, beneath all the stories about who you should have been by now. You were there. You are here. And perhaps that is enough for today. So as you continue with your life, carry this remembrance gently. You do not need to become someone new in order to deserve peace. You can begin by releasing what keeps you separated from the peace already within you. You do not need to become worthy of love. You can begin expressing the love that your deepest self already knows. You do not need to have the future figured out. You can meet this moment with awareness and allow the next moment to reveal itself when it arrives. And you do not need to wait for life to give you permission to be who you truly are. Perhaps the permission was always yours. If something in this journey helped you remember a part of yourself you had forgotten, you are welcome to share that reflection in the comments. Sometimes one person's realization becomes the gentle reminder another person needed to hear. And if you would like to continue exploring inner peace, forgiveness, awareness, intention, and the quiet journey back to your true self, you can subscribe and return whenever you need another moment of stillness. Until then, trust the unfolding. Forgive what you are ready to release. Be gentle with what is still healing. Choose love whenever you remember. And when you forget, simply return. Because the person you have been waiting for is not coming someday. You are remembering that person now.